First of all, Putin's brain is stuck in Soviet era. I've always been, about that, and a lot of people seem to agree. This is not a figure of speech, and they still have the stagnation and everything. Like, when I say stuck in Soviet era, I don't mean it as a figure of speech. Look, he's just beaten them. This reminds me of some sort of weird early beginning of 20th century stuff. And then we have to, live with the idea that Taiwan, because again, how comment please on the repressions of Putin, and then please how relevant Taiwan is and how likely is that to happen, because we don't want that to exist, at least here. That's what people in Europe are worried about.
I want to hear Daniele speak to. You have any thoughts, Daniele, about what I was saying earlier?
I don't know. It could really go either way. I kind of feel that as bad as it can get, is not going to be as bad as many people predict, in the sense that will Trump will there be a problem regardless of who win? 100%. I think it depends though how big it is, because most people are good enough to go on social media and bitch about something, but they are not going to be like the January 6th kind of guy. Now, of course, you don't need that many people to create an unstable environment. So do I think that there's a possibility for the growth of, particularly if Trump loses, or the growth of militias and possibly Oklahoma City bombing kind of scenes in the future? Yeah, I do think that's possible. I don't think it's going to be people on their daily shooting each other in the street. It's not civil war. I don't think so. We're very far from that, because I think, again, as you said earlier, I don't think most people care that much. Like, they may care on social media, but not if it actually costs them anything. It was a really small percentage when you look at the population of the US, but a really big enough percentage of those that could destabilize things quite a bit. But, the possibilities are so many at this stage, because we're 1 year removed. No, actually, not even just a few months, but, Trump could win. Trump could lose. Biden could be dead. For all intents and purposes, Trump could be dead, because he's like also 1 million years old in terrible physical shape and everything. Trump could get disqualified by the courts to run. There are like 10 different variables that could change the entire setup politically in US in the next few months. Now, the bad news is that I don't think there's a single one of those variables that will lead to a good outcome. The good news is that they don't all lead to the worst outcome. There are possibilities where, okay, it sucks, but it sucks like usual, as opposed to being extraordinarily terrible. And I think, to the larger point that also Christos was making earlier regarding the choices we have, like, the presence of Trump in the American system has been the Dan Carlin curse, right? Everybody smart, a la Dan Carlin, always wanted somebody who did not fit the mold of the career, lifelong, corrupt politician. And then they get Trump, and they are like, shit. Now, when it comes to the lesser of two evil, the horrendous, corrupt politician that we always hated is actually the less scary choice. How bad does it have to be when you're actually vying to get the classic corruption of the old days? And I think that's the problem. We were always thinking like, okay, this system cannot get worse. Anything is better than this. And then you got something and you're like, okay, we didn't really mean anything, not this bad. And I think that's the issue here. That is like the people that, it's not like the people who are opposing Trump on I don't mean on a personal level, I mean on a political level, like our model, like there's anything admirable there, is that the alternative is so shitty that is like, okay, I guess think about like, Biden is harder to even talk about because he's so far gone. But when you think about the alternative in 2016 was Hillary Clinton or Trump, it's like, Jesus Christ. Like, do you want one of the least likable, corrupt politician of the old mold? Or do you want a batshit crazy guy who is a narcissistic psychopath? Like, okay, it's like, you're not making my choices easier,
Yeah. Well, and Christoph, you mentioned what was going on in Russia with oppression. Yeah, I was actually curious, like, how were they that sounds very broad. I just wanted to know though, like, what were the metrics there with but so we could respond to that. Like, how are they measuring oppression is what I'm wondering.
Oh, these are people who have gotten basically court sentences. But oppression, it means the people who have gotten court sentences of some sort under criminal articles.
that related to speaking out against the government.
Yeah, well, basically, not for exactly that, but obviously for that. It's about people who have been, declared guilty for obviously fabricated reasons. By the way, if you look at the administrative cases, which are like, fines, then the number is even higher. But yeah, the metrics are about people who have been, they went to court as a criminal case, they had a criminal case against them, and then they were sentenced to something, got given some sort of punishment.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about that because the funny thing is, I don't know how it hasn't been as heavily enforced as it has been in Russia, but in the United States, we have something called the Espionage Act, and we also have something called the Sedition Acts, which technically the latter ones, have been on the books since 1798. But the Espionage Act and the expanded Sedition Acts from the World War I era do allow for that kind of prosecution, but I think our legal system actually works for the most part, so I don't think that we could get to those numbers unless some major changes happen to our judicial system. So I was just trying to wrap my head around the idea of, what is it, over 6,000 people have been, in Putin's time, have been sentenced to something because of speaking out against him and his government.
Under Putin, from 2018 to 2023, 5,613 people.
Just from 5 years? I thought this was over the course of 20. Oh, wow.
6 years. No. This is just last 6 years.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, that's insane. That's insane. Because, yeah, regardless of what people think about these people, we have Edward Snowden, Chelsea Manning, and Julian Assange, who isn't even an American citizen. Those are the big ones that everyone points to. But if you're in Russia, you could point to many, many examples. I'm assuming if you know them or if you know of them. I mean, that's insane. I don't know. I wonder if Glenn Greenwald has any shame right now because he, is acting like such a Putin stan these days. I'm being kind of dismissive of him, to be fair, but that brings up something we've talked about before, Kristaps, of just how many Westerners love to go to bat for Putin for some reason, just because they hate the West so much or something.
This has gotten weird because there was this guy Arestovich, the guy who used to be the advisor for Zelensky, and now he's just basically turned almost into a pro-Russian person, saying that Ukraine needs to do the West are the real evil, the real enemy, and everything. He's gone batshit insane himself too. So it's not just Westerners this time. It's we have bizarro people who have apparently gotten some weird things into their own heads as well. So
that seems to speak to what is something Daniele and I were kind of talking about with our politics these days, is that it's just about who you hate and not about what you believe. I'm assuming Zelensky's old advisor is more just mad at Zelensky for, you can maybe tell me why, and that's really what's motivating him, not a sudden sort of realization that Russia was right all along. Now, he could talk himself into believing that eventually, but I would just be willing to bet, just based on how things tend to be these days and just human nature, that it's really just about not liking Zelensky for some reason. Am I right on assuming that?
Maybe not, but it's just still
okay.
Again, I'm living through all this massive nonsense of this just happening, and then there's always people who just come out and they have some stupid easy solutions to all this nonsense. Because we spoke about this a while ago about how we use basically the language of the 19th century to describe modern problems, and this is just too much. In the 19th century, at least, the time was a bit slower, and we didn't have to worry about all this to this degree at such a point, right? You didn't have to worry in Latvia about how Taiwan, how the worrying has become global. Because again, I want to get to Taiwan because people are really worried about the fact that, okay, all the Israel situation already meant that people were worried that, hey guys, you will most likely forget about us anyways. Could you please not forget about Ukraine and all that stuff? If Taiwan would happen, we would be extra screwed. So we're just confused and would like to get some assurances that there are people who know what's up and who know what they're doing. I hope that because again, this is why I will ask you about China's situation, because if China right now is doing things that kind of the West maybe that gives us more security. And what's happening with their corruption issues, maybe because I heard that they have total weird inside corruption thing going on there.
I don't know it would depend on what you're talking about because
There's some sort of army stuff where they found that they've been selling off fuel or something. And there's like they're
I'm not aware of that actually, but I can look that up. Daniele, why don't you weigh in on this? Why I looked this up?
I vaguely heard of it, but it was like, the equivalent of catching a title and 3 lines, so nothing that I can comment with real knowledge on.
The first thing that came up in Newsweek is just a great headline. China's Air Force used missile fuel to cook meals, according to an ex-officer.
according to ex-officer is always is just
Yeah. Well, I mean, when it comes to the Taiwan question, like I was saying earlier, I didn't really delve into it, but I do know that Xi Jinping's sort of mission, like it's his ambition that he has always had, or at least had for a very long time, that he will be the guy that, in his mind, takes back Taiwan, like that pacifies Taiwan. And
Shin's always claimed to be the guy that would get Kuril Islands back, and he didn't. So
well, yeah, exactly. And he also was partly responsible for the entire Nanjing massacre denying lobby. That's, partly him too. And so that's why I'm not too sad about him getting whacked. But, that was part of our assassination conversation a while back. That was part of a trend that seems to just be continuing.
nothing's wrong. Government by assassination is going on and being strong.
It's a tradition, a long-standing tradition ever since the 1880s, especially in Russia. But yeah, the thing is though, like the stakes of China taking Taiwan, I can't really imagine. It would put them in control, presuming that there wouldn't be a massively destructive civil war, which there would be, and presuming that the sanctions that the U.S. would inevitably put on China wouldn't result in horrible suffering that I don't want to see happen because a lot of my family is still in China. Like that would, be an issue. But presuming that there was no issue and that they were able to take control of Taiwan, that would mean China has control of basically all of the microprocessors in the world, or at least the manufacture of them. And in that sense, that would be economically disadvantageous according to, U.S. policy. But at the same time, it just makes me think about why a Taiwan invasion is actually not that likely. I mean, again, Xi is a much more, as I understand it, he's a much more rational, calculating figure. This is just based on, what I've read and what my relatives have told me. The issue with him though is that he does have it as his ambition to do this. So that might overtake, any rational decision that he makes. But it would be irrational to go after Taiwan because it would cause such a disruption in really everything that I don't see it as being a good move. China and America are tethered together economically in a way that, at least as far as I know, Russia and America never were. There's less incentive for China to antagonize the West, broadly speaking, in that sense too. But at the same time, I don't know. I mean, they might think that they can muscle their way in. I know that there has been attempts at a more peaceful resolution in Taiwan. There are a number of Taiwanese people that do believe reunification, as they call it, would be good for them. That's another reason why I really hope that it doesn't happen, because that internal division, Taiwanese nationalists versus reunificationists, like that's a recipe for a very destructive and awful civil war that I could see China trying to outsource. Like they would prompt something and then they would try to outsource a civil conflict to therefore give them an incentive to come in and institute martial law, for example. I just gave Xi Jinping an idea if he hears this, which would be really funny if he listened to Eastern Border. But I'm just saying, like, I could see things like that happening, and I really hope it doesn't, because that would be intensely ugly, and it would prompt the U.S. to have to shift its focus over there, and that would be ultimately what probably breaks us on the international stage.
Do you think he might actually do it?
Again, I don't know. I mean, he has the ambition. I would imagine it played into his calculations for why he first had term limits abolished and then secured power a third time. And, you probably saw those creepy videos of like the elder statesman being escorted out awkwardly while he just ignores him. Had a very Chinese version of the Saddam Hussein purges feel to it. But I don't know. I mean, I just looked this up. Even if he tried, according to, take this for what it's worth, but the chairman of the U.S. House of Representatives Committee on China straight up warned Beijing. It was Mike Gallagher is the guy's name. This is what he said. The message we want to send in a bipartisan fashion is if Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party were to ever make the incredibly foolish decision to attempt an invasion of Taiwan, that effort would fail. I don't know what that means in detail, but there is at least some confidence being projected by Washington about this. I don't know if that confidence is misplaced, because again, I think that if it happened, whether we did anything to stop it or not, like through sanctions would be what we do, though it could turn into a naval warfare in the South China Sea, it would break us. I really don't think America could take it because, we have a volunteer army, and the idea of drafting young people into the army at this point, it's just it's a foregone conclusion that will never happen. That will never have conscription again because it's been so long, and Vietnam kind of destroyed that. I'm sort of thinking aloud here, but I'm imagining an attempt to reinstitute the draft comes up. That's when actually I would be willing to say that could lead to civil conflict on a massive scale because people would be so opposed to that.
Then there's Haiti, which also is a mess and is controlled by just, random gangs. And then there's Pakistan and its conflicts.
Some of this is impossible to really know what's up because the issue is there are calculations involved that none of us are privy to in terms of what they realistically can pull off and what they can't. Because, of course, we know what China would want at this point, but want and being able to do are clearly two different things. And, there's the issue of Taiwan could just destroy the very resources that China is after if they try to invade, in which case the whole invasion is pointless. So I think it's really we are at a place where we know what they want. We do not know what they can and cannot pull off realistically. And that's where the uncertainty is. Because the reality is that this is stuff that's debated at both in Taiwan, within China, but I don't mean debated in the newspapers. I mean, this is debated in the war rooms with generals making their calculations on what realistically can and cannot happen. And those are obviously not the discussion that we get to hear about.
And whatever happened with that vote to annex down in South America, you were talking about a while back. I didn't even follow up with that. I'm blanking even on the countries that were involved.
Well, to annex what exactly?
December 2023. Yeah. They Venezuela voted to annex Guyana. That's what it was.
The Essequibo particle. Yeah, they're sitting there. They have just dragged some boats on the shore, and they're just sitting there.
Okay, so they're not that serious about it, I guess.
No. They drag boats on the coast, but it's all a mess because again, no one knows.
Well, the analysis I saw here is that the U.S. might reimpose sanctions on Venezuela following that. So, that might be what's holding them back. That's the one thing that I do think is interesting is that how much of what we're talking about here is the sort of like rumblings of a global conflict that we recognize from the 20th century. People don't want to use the World War III term, but that's what we're kind of feeling. I think a lot of people are really nervous about that, and no one really wants to be, maybe not Putin. I won't speak to him. I think he doesn't care, maybe, but I don't think anyone wants to be the country that starts World War III. I think that's the big thing, because they recognize just how heavy it weighs on our consciences. As we know from World War I, something as small as Venezuela annexing Guyana could turn into something giant and out of control, and even faster than the First World War broke out, based on how information moves and everything. But I don't know. What I thought was so interesting, though, is just how people seem to be really motivated by the threat of sanctions from the U.S. So in a sense, as much as people want to complain about globalization and the U.S. economic juggernaut, I'm not willing to discount the fact that our economic might and our ability to disrupt trade on that level is what's stopping a global conflict from happening. So I can understand why people think that it's important for us to stay in the driver's seat, so to speak. But at the same time, what's his name? Peter Zeihan, who has made some pretty dire predictions, including that if China tried to take Taiwan, we would sanction them, a famine would hit, and then 500 million people would die or something, which I don't know if it would go that far. But he has made a point. We would see a rise in relatively high-tech piracy in the coming years. And sure enough, what has been happening with the Houthis? That's exactly what's been happening. And that has actually disrupted a lot of trade. And there's been a lot of flippant weirdly, it's been because they were smart. I'll give the Houthis this. They were very smart to rope in the Israel-Palestine issue into what they're doing, which is just rampant piracy. It's caused a lot of pro-Palestinian pundits here in the West to start just, oh, well, it's like, I'm happy. I'm fine if my Amazon package is like a week late. It's not that simple. The disruption of trade by pirates is a very big deal and taken very seriously for a reason, is because the supply chain is so interconnected. And that's why I am kind of sanguine about the use of sanctions and economic might. But at the same time, I'm also very skeptical that we can hold out as long as we have for much longer, especially if the strain is placed on every side. Like if we're supporting Ukraine, Israel, and then Taiwan, and just Guyana even. Like if we're supporting all these places at once, at a certain point, that tension is going to snap.
But the problem with Guyana is the fact that I don't think that it's going to be anything serious happening there.
No, I'm just using that as an example, though, just to say that, like, the more tension you put on a culture like ours, it can only take so much. Any culture can only take so much external tension. And how that snaps is the open question.
Daniele, tell us something nice. Tell us what your last Drunken Taoist podcast is about. Tell us something optimistic.
I always depress you when I'm on this show.
you be the guy that brings this from wankering to something like motivational, because fuck it, you gotta love life. You taught me that.
Something optimistic. So I think, like, always keep in mind for my own mental sanity is this. Starting from the ugly, human history is what it is. There have been like horrible things happening one after another throughout history, and they have always happened, they are happening, they will continue to happen. Some periods worse than other, but there's little argument the nature of the beast. I think what's important is that in the middle of terrible situations, human beings have figured out ways to have their families, to have great kids, to manage to steal great moments of happiness in the midst of it all. Now, this is, of course, little consolation when you have an army at your door that's massacring your family. And, when that happens, clearly there's no silver lining. But generally speaking, even in a fairly horrible situation, individuals have found ways to create some breathing room, to create even a really happy life. Even if you stood at the edge of the precipice, even if you stood the fact that doom and gloom was out the door, as long as it was out the door and not in, people still manage and and that's kind of my go-to mental health reminder when I need it, when I look at the external circumstances, some way to the present moment. Go back to right here, right look, I can have a glass of wine. This feels really nice. Oh, I can kiss my girlfriend. This is amazing. I can, bring it back to a level that's literally, to quote the Al Pacino speech in Any Given Sunday, it's about the 6 inches in front of your face. It's like something that you can affect, that you have power on, that is right in your immediate environment. And that, to me, is the place that it does not feel disempowering, where you can feel some degree of happiness and power over the kind of stuff you do. Because, of course, the bigger you cast the net, the more you look at the world situation or politics on a large scale, the more you feel like, even if you do understand it all, that there's really not much you can do about it. And of course, inevitably, that feels depressing.
Okay, well, let's keep it that way, because of course we'll be having a lot of trouble to deal with other areas. So let's keep it at a positive spin here. And I think everyone who wants to should now be unmuted and ask some questions to either Daniele or Alex, or even me. But you guys here can ask me questions all the time, so use your chances to maybe talk to Daniele or Alex.
While we're waiting, I can tell Daniele a quote that I want to see if you know who it is. Many paths lead from the foot of the mountain, but at the peak we all gaze at the single bright moon, which is what I was looking. It just really resonated with me because I was looking for this certain person. Do you know who said that?
No.
That is Ikkyu Sojun.
Oh, good old Ikkyu.
Yeah, and I was like, because you were talking about how depressing history is, and I was just thinking, you know what? Ikkyu Sojun, that story is like so life affirming. It's so much that like be present, be grateful, and enjoy life as you can. Stick to what's in front of your face. And that quote like does kind of really resonate with me in that way.
Yeah, what I love about that guy is that he did manage to have these fantastic lives in the middle of the beginning of 150 years of civil war in Japan. in the middle of mass starvation in Kyoto burning down, all of this stuff. So that's kind of exactly the kind of stuff I was talking about.
Yeah, he knew what mattered most in the everyday living.
Having a really good quality beer helps as well.
That is true. He enjoyed sake, but yeah.
Well, obviously. Okay, Ellen Dussil asks, I'm on the personal opinion we are still a ways away from getting anywhere near to close to where we were at the lead up to the Civil War. What are some possible checkpoints you guys can see between where we are now and then?
Yeah, I think when it comes to US is the fact of the matter is the majority of people are too comfortable to go there. And, everybody can talk shit on Facebook, but when it comes to actually put your life on the line, I think most people are not that batshit crazy. And they are like, you know what? I hate that guy who gained power, but screw it. There's The Boys on TV, and I just wanna watch that, and I'll play some PS5 next, and leave me alone.
You stole my answer.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's real, right? I think it's like there's a degree where, and again, don't get me wrong. I think there will be people who are batshit crazy, and they will go down a rough route. But I think, and that can be very disruptive. But I think it's such a minute percentage of the population that probably, and I'm not saying certainly, but probably won't start a fire that start consuming everything else.
Yeah, and to be clear, when I say I make it a point to say civil conflict. I'll be the voice of pessimism here about this, just so we can balance things out a bit. Again, I don't think we are set up in such a way geographically even to have a civil war in a recognizable sense. I'm actually kind of curious about that movie coming out later this year called Civil War. Speculates about what a U.S. Civil War would look like, a second Civil War, and it seems to be a little more grounded than I would expect. But regardless, I don't think that we could see an analog to Civil War. I think the best analog that we could see, the best worst case scenario would be something akin to the Troubles in Ireland, where you have militia, conflict, terrorism at an increased scale. So obviously very bad, especially if you bring the scale up from the size of the UK to the size of the US, it's going to look really bad. But I don't see it going much beyond that because I don't think most people want that. They just want to live their lives, watch their, Netflix / Amazon / Max / Hulu play. I mean, that's what I want to do. I want to, I'm looking forward to the new Final Fantasy game coming out next week. So that's my big thing.
I have to read some comments here. Super Joselic says if we had a civil war, it would be like Italy in the 70s on steroids. And someone pointed that one out.
I don't know what that means. Daniele, can you lay that out, please? Like what he's talking about?
Yeah. I mean, what happens with that is that you did have the various groups, the fascist versus left wing, that would occasionally shoot each other in the street, would occasionally, do stuff like that where it was violent, people died. But, in the great scheme of things, 99.9% of the population would remain mostly unaffected unless you happen to be on that one train where some crazy fascist blows up the train and now whatever hundreds of people die. So it's clearly an unsettling scenario, but it's not one that like everybody's in the trenches kind of thing.
Hello there, and thanks for listening to another episode of The Eastern Border. Dear Patreons, thank you more than ever for supporting our show. Your donations are crucial to keep us going, and right now all of your money is going to securing good information for you and to fund Kristof's actual real-life mission to Ukraine to report to you live about the war that is going on there. Also, we would like to use this opportunity to urge you to donate to other organizations that are helping people escape Ukraine safely and to defend the country for those who decide to stay on the ground. One such organization we would like to highlight is the Defending Ukraine Together Come Back Alive movement. Launched in 2014, the Come Back Alive became the biggest organization providing support to the armed forces of Ukraine. You can donate directly from their webpage, comebackalive.in.ua. Remember that no donation is too small. In this situation, every dollar matters, every cent matters. If you're uncomfortable with giving money to war, they do have a position on their website that they are providing Ukrainian army with laptops, lights, photo equipment, cables, and is not purely military. Perhaps that might change your mind, but remember you can also donate to strictly humanitarian organizations such as the Red Cross and others that are helping people escape Ukraine safely. Please also keep following us on social media for all of your latest updates on Eastern Border on places like Twitter and Facebook. Keep listening, keep yourself informed. That's all from me now. See you online.
Yeah, and then Wisp asks, were China try to invade tomorrow, what do you think the extent of US and EU involvement would be and how long? Europe is weird in this because we're having a case of lots of friendlies with China often. Like whenever Macron says something, and like a lot of people in Europe at least don't see China as their enemy in a way. Because Macron said that if China and Taiwan would start something, then that would be a conflict which would totally not be our conflict. That's officially what Macron stated. He's probably, in a way, right. People here, basically, everyone was like very muted when he said that, except the ex-president of Poland, which is now changed to Macron's buddy Donald Tusk, thinks that Europe would try to not get super involved into Taiwan at all because we don't have a trade war with China. We really need China to do all the technology stuff, and we don't have the industry or the traditional kind of rivalry. EU does not have a rivalry with China. We're doing fine. We are considered the market for their stuff, and they like our technologies and everything. Because obviously we would do polite stuff, but I highly doubt that that we would do too much besides sanctions. We definitely wouldn't be sending any of our troops there because we have Ukraine to worry about, I think.
Yeah, and I just looked up the numbers because I just realized I shouldn't be the barometer for feelings about China because, just to be clear, because I have family connections there at this point, I would have a much more complicated reaction to America getting involved if China decided to take Taiwan, just because it's more personal. And I think that that's a key thing for people to remember about any conflict is that it's, when it gets personal, opinions are going to become much more varied. But I would say I have a more positive view on China, not its government as much, but on China itself, because of my personal experience. And so I was thinking, I don't know what Americans think outside of my bubble about it. And I looked it up, and it's actually surprising. Only 14% of Americans have a positive view of China. What that translates to, I don't know. But what that says to me is you wouldn't get very much pushback, I think, if America decided to get involved if Taiwan was invaded tomorrow. There would actually be, the sanctions would probably start immediately or close to immediately. I don't think there would be much debate based on the numbers I just saw there, because people over the age of 29 apparently, or over the age of 45, if I don't have the thing in front of me anymore, it's something like 91% have an unfavorable view of China. So I don't think that there's any chance that there would be the same kind of dissent here. I don't even think we would get as many contrarians coming out of the woodwork as we did with, Russia invading Ukraine or Israel retaliating on Gaza. I think it would actually be pretty muted based on those numbers.
This whole China thing also is a bit weird because over here, in Europe, we kind of look at them and in case of whatever, they'll take over parts of Russia. That's okay.
That'd be interesting, to say the least. What you have prognosticated, and I've heard this actually echoed elsewhere from other people who, speak Russian and who have an unfavorable view of it too, just, for what it's worth, that the ultimate breakup of Russia that happens after Putin dies, which I can't imagine there being an alternative to that scenario, especially now, post Navalny and post, seemingly every other alternative to him being whacked and all the infrastructure around him, the political infrastructure being dissolved. Like, I can't see any other outcome other than what you have pointed out, which is a sort of balkanized Russia. I can't rule out the possibility that China would annex a large part of it, at least, over in maybe like the northeastern region or something.
Yeah, they already have like their school maps with territory inside Russia and all that stuff. We also have another question. what parallels would you draw between Japan on the lead up of World War II and China now? Also, how would you compare the United States trade restrictions on Japan on the World War II lead up and potentially action on China?
I mean, I think it's very different in the sense that Japan did not own the US in terms of depth. China has such leverage on the United States that Japan was not nearly in that kind of favorable position at the time. I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, I mean, and if I'm understanding the question correctly, is laying out the scenario. China goes into Taiwan, we're mad about it, and we put sanctions on them, and that starts to negatively affect China in ways that are so hard that the only incentive is for them to attack us, or the main incentive, we'll say. I don't want to say only. I have to go. I don't know the history, honestly, and I should. Good analog would be, how did the US react to when Japan invaded China in 1937? If like how that fed into all of that. I don't know the answer to that. I don't want to speculate about that. But if we want to play with the idea that maybe that's what it was, then sure, I could see there being something comparable there. But I don't know. And I just see that I cannot pronounce that name, I'm sorry, but Super Jellyzik says that the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor thinking it would bring us to negotiate. Is that, I'm actually unaware of that. Is that true?
I don't. They wanted. I have to re-listen to Dan Carlin's Pacific Theater. Super Gisele wants to talk about the Japanese and the harbor stuff. To those of you who don't know, we are live on my Discord, so this is why he didn't talk now.
Yeah. So my username is actually pronounced Super Zik. It's a German thing, but anyway. No, the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor thinking that, given our reluctance to intervene in Europe and in other places, that it would essentially discourage us and essentially bloody our noses so bad where it's like, who wants to go die for the Philippines? Who wants to go die for China? And they were hoping that would discourage us into coming to the table. And I've always thought the conventional wisdom is the Chinese would try to neutralize our bases, like, say, in Guam.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And where else? Virgin Islands? Or is that a little beyond their scope?
I mean, I think there's stuff in the Philippines, but I think, we have some possessions in the Pacific. They would try to neutralize those and hopefully basically deliver like a blinding or paralyzing shot that essentially we wouldn't be able to respond, and there would be enough discouragement that the holidays are coming up in 2 months. Do we really want to go to war over that?
Now that you're saying this, it jarred my memory. I heard, this is not my thought, and it's actually not even a thought. It's just a reference. We should factor in, how would Japan respond to this? Because Japan and China are, believe it or not, they're still not friends. I don't think the Chinese have forgiven Japan for things that probably can't be forgiven. So yeah,
Well, that's always been the down low worry of the U.S., that if we welched out on our obligations to Japan, Japan would say, well, screw this, we're going to strap up and we're going to get us some our own nukes. And, oh, by the way, USA, you don't have control of the button.
Yeah.
And they've always done that with Europe too, where, like, people complain that, oh, Europe's not paying for the defense. And then the moment, like, the EU starts talking about, hey, we should get our own Euro Corps and we should have our own Euro Army. And U.S. diplomats always come in, no, boo, we got you.
And that sounds more like geopolitical strategy, where it's like, oh, no, we don't want, to lose influence, that, we don't want to lose that type of influence, I guess. That is, yeah, I do wonder, like, if maybe I feel bad saying this, but I just have the bias in my head that China looks at Japan and Japan's like, hey, if you try something in Taiwan, we're going to step up too. And then China is the Don Draper meme of, I don't think about you at all. But I don't know. Maybe that's not true. That's just my bias. That was my assumption there.
They think about Japan all the time.
I was going to say, yeah, because when I was in China, it was in 2012. It was during, there was some dispute over those islands or something. And I just have this memory of going through Shenzhen, where I was staying. And there was like a barber shop that had a sign in the window, and I couldn't read it, but I, had my partner with me and she translated it for me. And it was like, if you go in there and you say such and such island belongs to China, they give you a free haircut. So yeah, I see. Wisp just posted U.S. ally shows off Navy's newly updated aircraft carrier.
What's about the author of the Blood Meridian, Daniele? I don't know this writer at all. I was just
The way I look at things is this: is like when I look at fiction, I don't need it to be all good guys always win, everything is wonderful, but I do need to feel inspired. I do need to feel, I can have anti-heroes, but at the end of the day, they are still heroes, even though they may be anti a bit. I need characters that I like. In McCarthy, I don't like anybody. I'm just like, I feel like he's a great writer from a stylistic standpoint, but I just don't care about anyone in his story. If they all die in the next page, I'm totally fine with it. And so that's kind of a problem for me because it's the vibe I get is that the word that he described is a word that's so cynical and so ugly that I just have no interest in anybody in it.
Yeah, I was gonna throw in there that if you're talking about Blood Meridian, that absolutely applies. There is no it's just a book about villains doing villainous stuff. And to be fair, the people they're talking about is the Glanton gang, which were villainous. There was nothing good about those people. They were basically a group of scalp hunters that back in the I am blanking on the decade, but it was in the middle of the 19th century. People were getting paid to, like, bounty hunters, basically. We're getting paid to go into the desert and hunt down Apache and other various warring tribes at the time and kill them, and then they would get paid per scalp. And then the Glanton gang, so greedy and bloodthirsty and crazy that instead of going after Indians, they just went down into Mexico and just started killing random Mexicans and bringing back those scalps to get paid. And that's basically the background of that book, but it gets much more into like really weird dark philosophy and stuff like that. There's a character named Judge Holden who's been called the greatest villain of all time. I agree with that sentiment, but to Daniele's point, I agree that it's not a good book to read if you want to feel inspired, for sure.
I'm told that's good horror, and I like my horror genre. The book that I find very weird in this sense is still a Second Apocalypse series, but those are massive, and you shouldn't read them. You don't start reading Second Apocalypse. That will hurt you.
I like that Joe Luxemburger Spy says, "Oh goodness, no punctuation in Blood Meridian." That's McCarthy's problem too. He's very
which reminds me, I have to finish reading. What was this? The Lunch book.
Oh, Naked Lunch.
Naked Lunch, yes.
Yeah, that's William S. Burroughs. That's some wild shit too.
It's insane, but
The thing with fiction is that because I think doing history podcast we have to read so damn much that's non-fiction. Sometimes when I get to fiction, I'm like, okay, this is my fun time. I'm not working, so you better blow my mind and make it amazing. Otherwise, I'm gonna be really pissed there. I can read a non-fiction that's okay because I derive some useful information in there. But when it comes to fiction, it better be amazing because otherwise you're wasting my damn time kind of feeling. So my standards on fiction are considerably stricter than when it comes to non-fiction. I'm going to mildly contradict myself here because he's not the most inspiring guy ever. But one guy that I've read that I enjoy his writing so much is Don Winslow. Don Winslow writes about stuff that I don't give a crap about, in the sense that every other book of his is about the drug war at the border and Mexico and the cartels, and I'm like, could not care less. However, when it comes to him as a writer, holy shit, his style is just unreal how good he is. He's just so fun to read, purely like the way the images he uses, some of the jokes, the paradox, and like he's just a phenomenal writer. I seriously wish he wrote about something else once in a while, but in terms of enjoyment of a guy being an absolute master of the genre, that's it. But for the sake of telling you something fun, one thing that I've been looking at again is something that I read a couple of times in the past, and it's a humongous book, like bigger than pretty much anything I can think of. But there's this Italian epic poem from the 1400s called Orlando Furioso by this author Ludovico Ariosto. The whole thing is it makes you think that maybe they had discovered LSD in the 1400s because his imagery, his weirdness, his everything is just so bizarre, so out there that you would think was created today by somebody on acid. Even his politics, like the background of the whole epic poem is this clash between Christian and Muslims. But then he goes on and follows the side story of like 50 different characters, and they range from the extraordinary to the weird to the epic to all sort of stuff. And he features incredibly powerful women and has a very pro women rights type of thing in the 1400s. He has a story that are, when I speak about the guy being on LSD in the 1400s, like the lead character in the whole thing, we see him having lost his mind because he was in love with a woman who doesn't love him back. But Ariosto takes the lost his mind literally. So what happens is that in Ariosto's theory, everything that has been lost by human beings on Earth ends up on the moon. And so one of these knights' friends end up acquiring a flying horse, flies to the moon where he find all the things that human beings have lost on Earth, including his friend mind. He picks it up and bring it back to him. I mean, this is like, it's so weird and bizarre and funny that I just have a blast reading that guy.
I don't want to say readable, but would I be able to enjoy it as an English speaker? Because I mean, you've spoken about poetry in Italian in the past. I mean, and how it's just not the same. It's lost in translation. I mean, I'm assuming there's good translations out there, but I can't imagine it's as good.
No, of course not. But also the thing is, even the original is from the 1400s. So even for me, reading it in Italian is still not the easiest, smoothest thing because the language has changed so much. But no, I think Penguin has published 2 volumes of the whole epic poem, and the translation, I mean, is epic poetry. So, it's not like super easy to read necessarily, but once you get used to the language, it's hilarious. It's really funny, very creative, very, I love that stuff.
Yeah, I was trying to remember why I knew Don Winslow's name, and it's because he wrote the book that really mediocre adaptation Oliver Stone made of Savages was based on.
Yeah. The book the movie kind of sucked. The book was good.
Yeah. I've been meaning to check because I think I remember you recommending him to me like a while ago when we were just talking on the phone, and because like you had been reading one of those books, and I was just like, oh, I got to check that out. And as you said, fiction is really hard to make time for. I mean, especially when you're doing research for a podcast, for sure. When you add on top of that needing to do research for grad school, it's even harder. But the last fiction book I read that just on its own was a book called, and it wasn't light, it was called American War by Omar El-Akkad. And it's this speculative fiction book about the U.S. Second Civil War, actually. We were talking about that earlier. It takes place in the 2070s to the 2100s. And it's written from this sort of journalistic perspective. And it's really good. It's very depressing. But I would highly recommend people check it out if they get a chance. I don't really want to spoil it too much, but it's basically about this poor family in the South living through sort of it's funny. It's kind of it really mirrors the way they depict the South after its loss, because they do manage to make it be about the North versus South. I don't know how that realistic that is, but they managed to depict the South after it loses this second civil war to be very similar, in a very similar situation to Gaza. So it's very interesting in that respect nowadays. Besides that, though, the only fiction I've really been able to read, and it's, was a concerted effort since last year, has been to try to get back into reading old Star Wars legacy books. And I have been reading the new Jedi Order series, which is a 20 book series, and I'm kind of stuck in the middle at this point just because I haven't had time. But it's a really cool sort of reimagining of the Star Wars universe, where instead of fighting Dark Jedi and or the Sith, or rather, and the Empire and all that, takes place 20 years after the original trilogy, and it's about these aliens that come in from another galaxy and are basically the Hellraiser aliens. They worship pain, they worship suffering, and they're evil conquerors, and they don't exist in the Force. It's a really cool inversion of what you expect from Star Wars. Maybe there's people in your audience, Kristaps, who have read it. I can tell me to like just give up now because it doesn't get better. But I'm enjoying it. I'm really liking it, and it's it is a nice break from reading about how like just depressing history all the time.
Oh, come on. Stuff's not that depressing like all the time.
When you're reading about the Balkans, yes, it is.
Oh no, look, you have to embrace. I recommend specifically for you. I'll just find a link to you and send it to you on all of the Balkans, which will actually make you happy. It's called Living Ironically in Europe. This is a guy from Balkans. He explains how these people, their relationships, and just basically go and check out Living Ironically in Europe if you want to know about Balkans from a guy who lives in Balkans. And he makes funny videos about the stereotypes and how they treat each other online and all that stuff. It's good. It'll make you happier.
I just found him on Twitter. I'm gonna have to start following him. That sounds fun. Yeah, I actually started following a Serbian comedian on Instagram who's very funny, but whose name escapes me. So I wish I could shout him out, but he's very funny.
We will check him out a bit later. But anyways, so to wrap things up, hope is out there if you look for it. I suppose it's in the little things. It seems that seems to be the message here. Alex, Daniele, do you have any famous final ending words or things you would like?
Yes, my fledgling self-esteem needs listeners. So if you guys need a history fix, hop on History on Fire, because then I can go back to flexing in the mirror and feeling good about myself. Otherwise, I have to tell myself, bad Toby, I whack myself on the back.
I have a question. Is the Caravaggio episodes available?
Yeah, I think those are. I'm switching things as far as the like I need to try a new server. I think I'm gonna end up on Libsyn. So there are some older episodes that are harder to find on a few servers, but if you go to the website historyonfirepodcast.com, you can download them there directly for sure. If you are on Apple or something, it may or may not, because the server that I currently has limited me to 100 episodes. So basically each new episode I release, they get rid of one of the old ones. But that just stupid bullshit that's going on. But like if you go to the actual website, to History on Fire podcast, you can download them there. And hopefully soon enough I'll make the switch, and then that won't be a problem, and you can download them from anywhere you listen to podcasts.
Yeah, because that was the thing. That was my favorite episode personally. Joe Luxemburger, by the way, asks, is there anything that Daniele is currently obsessed with?
So the one that I'm in the middle of right now, I just did the first episode, and there will be a next episode the next month. It's a heavy story. It's more recent than most of the stuff I usually cover. I'm in the middle of this tale about El Salvador in the 1970s and 1980s. So it has to do with American politics there, but also it has to do with just conditions on the ground in El Salvador. And on a larger level, it's a bit of a parable of some Cold War policies and the effect they had throughout Latin America.
Well, I'm in the middle of doing research and writing and production of finally getting back to the central story of the so-called Muslim Nazis, where I'm talking about Hajj al-Husseini and the propaganda of the Nazis directed at the Arab and Muslim worlds. So that'll be out probably the next couple months. But in the meantime, I've been doing a lot of interviews. I talked to Richard Lim of the This American President's podcast about the 1876 election. So if people in America, at least, but globally too, want to get a little perspective on how bad things can get in elections and how we have probably not matched 1876, they should listen to that one. Like I said earlier in the episode, I have a conversation with JD Hewitt of History Underground about the lack of knowledge about the Holocaust. But if you want narrative stuff, I mean, the stuff I'm most proud of lately, most obsessed with, I mean, I referenced the Balkans earlier, is the trilogy of episodes I did called the Balkan Inferno. That's sort of part of the larger Muslim Nazi series, where so it's a really good way to feel depressed and horrified, though. So I don't know. I mean, if you listen to it, you'll understand why I tend to have such a pessimistic edge whenever I come here. So, but yeah, that's pretty much it. Just, stay tuned if you like the show, follow it on Substack and all that. I try to get stuff out there too. Also I have I'm turning my research paper about the aftermath of the Salem witch trials into an episode, a special episode for people. It should be coming out pretty soon too.
First, my next episode is going to be a bit of a breather one because I wanted to do something that is not 100% war. It's a talk about Magic the Gathering and some more Wisconsin stuff and survival with a guy who's a Magic YouTuber.
That's awesome.
And in survival stuff too, because his other channel is doing survival stuff. So that's going to be fun. That's going to be the next episode after this one. But for now, до свидания, товарищи. As always, remember, happiness is mandatory. And if you don't listen to Daniele and Alex, then you should definitely go and do so. I mean, immediately. So yeah, thanks. And once again, до свидания, товарищи. And happiness is mandatory.
Thank you for listening to the Eastern Border Show. If you have any questions or comments, go to our website, theeasternborder.lv, and leave a comment there. Or email us at theeasternborder@gmail.com. We'll be sure to answer. You can also follow us on social media and contact us there. If you enjoyed this episode, then leave us a review on Apple Podcasts and tell your friends about us. It really helps us grow the show. And remember, happiness is mandatory.